Now, let's get started. Have you ever wished you could look into a crystal ball and see how your young preschool student will fare in early literacy and numeracy kindergarten activities? Do you wonder if the child has just the right skills to succeed in what's now a highly demanding academic setting in kindergarten? Who in this room wants to consider how early intervention teaching strategies can be more effective, have a greater impact? If you answered yes to any of those questions, then I am confident that you are in the right place. Today, we're exploring a foundation of learning, concept development as it relates to discrimination of shapes, sizes, direction, position, quantity. Those are just to name a few. Documented in research, these relational concepts are absolutely critical to not only early literacy and numeracy skills, but also the ability to follow directions and experience common conversation in the kindergarten classroom. But how do we know what they know? How do we as teachers figure out, discern if a young child struggles with these concepts due to lack of experience or a lack of knowledge? If we know the answer, then I would say our teaching strategies can be more effective. Today, we find out how the Boehm-3 preschool tool can be used to set children who are blind or have low vision up for success and ultimately school readiness. Paving the way for our learning on all of this information is the very industrious Catherine Smyth, Director of Research at Anchor Center for the Blind, who also teaches at the university level and our knowledgeable expert of APH's product of the Boehm-3 Preschool. It was her dissertation in 2017 that documented validation of the tactile edition of the Boehm-3, which will be discussed today. Throughout the next 90 minutes, here's what you can expect. We're going to identify the meaning of the term authentic assessment, dive into some materials of the Boehm-3, and discuss the history of this tool. Before we begin, we would like to know just a little bit more about you. So we're going to launch a poll. Have you used the Boehm-3 Preschool, Big Picture, or Tactile Kit? We would love to know. And if you would, hopefully that poll is active. Have you used the Boehm-3 Preschool, Big Picture Kit, Tactile Kit? So here are our options. Yes, I have the product and use with students. Yes, I have the product, but I'm unsure how to use it. No, I have not used the product. And our last option, no, I have never even heard of this product before this webinar. So we would love to know, where do you fit in? Where do you fit in with knowledge about this? So that we can get to Catherine and her presentation, I'll just share out because we all want to know. So just to let you know, we have 63% said, 63% who polled, I have not used this product. 19% said this is the first time they have ever heard of it. And 17% said that they have the product and they use it. So a little bit of everything. We can all benefit from what you have to teach us today. And I will pass things over to you.
Hi, everybody. So you can call me Kathy. It doesn't have to be Catherine. But I am so grateful to APH, Access Academy, for the opportunity to be here to talk more about the Boehm-3 Preschool Assessment. And we're going to start today with educational assessment and the different ways that it's used. It's been my experience that we often have a negative response when the terms assessment and tests are used in general, especially as a teacher of students with visual impairment. We often assume that tests are not appropriate for our students and that we're not comfortable sometimes giving them unless they're a functional vision assessment. I hope that by the end of this webinar, you may feel a bit differently about this. So let's think about the three different kinds of educational assessment and where does the Boehm-3 preschool fit in. First, there's developmental screening. Developmental screening is often where we're looking for levels of development or the presence of a medical risk. Think about newborn hearing screening or the vision testing that the school nurse may be doing with all the children in the school. Many of our early checklists, such as the ones that parents fill out in the pediatrician's office, come under this section. They are important because they can help us have a quick idea if there's anything we should be following up on. These can be helpful in a general way, but there should also be a way to measure and collect information on specific skill development to guide instruction and measure progress over time. So the Boehm-3 preschool tactile and big picture versions have been created to meet this particular need. These assessments may also allow for a better understanding of how well individual children can make the transition from knowing concepts on their own bodies to recognizing relationships between objects, and then also in a two-dimensional format. So I want to tell you a little bit why I was so interested in helping to create the Boehm-3 preschool. I have many, many years as a teacher of students with visual impairment and have worked with young children. And it was very frustrating to me that I didn't have a way to show exactly what the children knew. I could tell stories, I could give information at the IEP meeting, but I didn't have a specific way of showing exactly what they knew and that their progress had been made. So think about children who have vision. When they're learning to read, first they interact with real objects, then they look at images or pictures, and then they see the letter. So think about parents driving into McDonald's and they see the giant M and they start putting together that M is actually a letter and it stands for McDonald's. So that's something that happens over time and incidentally. Well, the truth is our children with visual impairment need that same experience to learn. They're not just going to go from real objects to braille symbols. There's a process in between. And so I think the Boehm-3 preschool, and you'll hear more about this later, is that opportunity for us to see as teachers and how can we intervene to make sure that that process is happening. So that they're going from real objects to tactile images or visual images of those real objects. And then they can go to letters and then they can start thinking about reading. So that's what my goal was when I started doing this. So now let's talk about the last one. Finally, I mentioned program evaluation. I think this is what most parents and teachers think about when the term educational assessment is used. Program evaluations are looking at classroom or state level of performance, so the big picture. And they can be very high stakes. And so they're a little scary. It's like, I don't know if I want my child to participate in this because they might bring down the scores for the school. While these assessments are necessary and can be very useful to improve the field through research, adaptations for our students can be challenging. Not impossible, but challenging. So I'm not going to address this type of assessment today. We're going to stick with the progress monitoring, but I want you to see where it fits in and that it's not the same. The Boehm is not a high stakes test and you can use it with your students in a very functional way. Okay, So when we are talking about young children, it's important to use strategies that have been shown to be the most effective. Assessment for preschoolers should be authentic. And what does that mean? It means that it should include observations of individual children's performance in daily routines and activities in the classroom, as well as the use of developmental checklists to determine age-expected behavior. It should also include progress monitoring. This type of assessment is where you can start to look at the skills of one child over time, perhaps at the beginning of the school year, and then at the end or 6 months from now, and determine if there has been growth. So there's no doubt we don't want you to just use the Boehm. We don't want you to just use a developmental checklist, and we don't want you to just use observations. With young children, best practice is for you to use all of that, and that's called authentic assessment. All right. So there are two versions of the Boehm-3 Preschool. One is the big picture version, so-called because there are no letters or symbols in it, right? And then there's also the tactile version, which we'll discuss a little bit more at length because it has more adaptations, and that's what the validation was done on. So what does the Boehm-3 Preschool tell us? For preschoolers, as Amy already kind of mentioned, for preschoolers ages 3 through 5 years, 11 months, that's what it is designed for, an understanding of the relational concepts measured by the Boehm-3 Preschool, whether visual or tactile, is critical for early academic skills, as well as following directions for orientation and mobility at home and in the classroom. And so how do we know this? There's many studies, but there's actually a big national transition study that was looking at children going from preschool to kindergarten in the year 2000. And they interviewed hundreds of kindergarten teachers and asked them what was the most challenging thing that they were finding of their students who were moving from preschool to kindergarten. This is not just children with visual impairment. This is not just children in special education. This is all children moving from preschool to kindergarten. The single most challenging thing that kindergarten teachers indicated was children not being able to follow directions. So that seems very simple, but it's something I think we just assume that we're teaching our children, and maybe we're not. Maybe we need to look closer at our teaching strategies. Are we teaching children how to follow directions? And the Boehm-3 Preschool absolutely can be something that can help you kind of think more about that. So who can administer the Boehm-3 Preschool? I was looking at all the different others in the poll and who everybody was. And here's what I would say. This is what we were thinking about as we helped to develop this. It is highly recommended, regardless of who is giving the assessment, that the test administrators consult with teachers of students with a visual impairment for insight into that particular child's tactile, visual, and cognitive skills. But honestly, any early childhood teacher or school assessment professional who knows the child is appropriate. This includes TSVIs, COMs, early child special educators, early childhood teachers, school psychologists, and even speech language pathologists. So this is a very appropriate test to give a child if you feel comfortable. And again, I recommend that you talk to the child's TSVI so that you can make the appropriate decisions. So let's go back and talk a little bit about item development that went into the adaptations for the Boehm-3 Preschool. So I will say, working with the experts at APH was invaluable. I cannot even tell you how many millions of details there are in putting together a product. It took a really long time and it was really complex. We never could have done it without them. So we're very grateful that APH was willing to take this on. First, let's talk about the big picture versions. So there's an image on this slide of me giving a field test version. The pictures it contains comes from the validated version of Dr. Boehm's original tests. So Dr. Boehm created a test as her dissertation long ago, the test of basic concepts. But for us, for the big picture version, we took those images and we removed the backgrounds often. And for some, we added higher contrast. For example, on one of the pages, the yellow lemons were put on a blue plate instead of on a pink one, just so that we could make it a little higher contrast. The test is given on an easel with the child looking at the images and the administrator sitting behind reading the script. So when you flip the page over, the script for giving the test is right there. The score sheet has an identical image of the items, and that way you can just quickly circle whatever you observe the child chooses. And we'll talk a little bit about this setup later on in more depth, but for now, that's what you need to know about the big picture. Now, the tactile version was created, and we completely changed all the familiar tactile stimuli in the assessment because we wanted most children with visual impairment to have already encountered these kinds of stimuli in their daily routines. They include things like spoons, toothbrushes, buttons, zippers, as you see here. These kinds of things were consistently recognized and proved engaging to 3, 4, and 5-year-olds, and we tested them. Using items that are engaging allows teachers to continue to encourage children to complete more items in the tasks. So sharing that another item with the gingerbread cookie is coming up may result in more items that are completed during that session. So if I have a student who's excited about feeling the gingerbread cookie and they're starting to wane a little bit, I can say, I'm looking ahead and there's another item with the gingerbread cookie. Do you think you can make it? And oftentimes that is enough to make that happen. I want to point out too that you should know that all Boehm-3 preschool materials are available through federal quota in your state. So we'll mention that again later, but you should be able to access this assessment. Okay. So what happens when we have a student who's not ready to take this assessment yet? And we'll talk about that a little bit more. But when we did the field test, a suggestion from teachers during the field test was that we provide an opportunity to familiarize the children with all the items on the test in a kind of playful environment. So therefore, we created what we call the Getting Ready binder. Now, each page in the Getting Ready binder has one single test item on the page. So one different kind of stimuli. So there would be one zipper or one button or one length of beads. And so you can take out those items individually and you can do a myriad of things. You can have the children play matching games. So you could have 2 tests and have them match 2 kinds of lengths of beads or zippers, right? You could play labeling games. You can use real objects. So you can have a button center where you have a variety of real buttons, and then you have the page with the button on it so that they start to make that transition, that understanding of what I was talking about earlier. You can ask the children to locate specific items in the book on request. So you can say, oh, can you flip through the book and find the button for me? And then see how quickly they do it. Once the child is familiar with the items, you can administer the actual assessment. So here, this is important part. I often get questions about this. This is not teaching the test, okay? The Boehm is testing the relationships between the objects on the page, not the items themselves. So it should not be considered a tactile discrimination test, and you actually want the children to be comfortable with all the different items so that when you ask them the question about the relationship, they're not spending a lot of time trying to figure out what's on the page. They already know because they've already been exposed to all these. So this is a little different than most tests, but it's completely okay to do this. So in order for a child to be ready to take the test, they have to be able to indicate to you that they can make a choice. They have to. It doesn't have to be verbal. It can be with touch, it can be with eye gaze, it can be any reliable way, even using assistive or augmentative communication devices, whatever needs to happen, but the child must be able to make a choice. And while the child is exploring the materials, you might be able to think more about which version is more appropriate. You may end up doing both assessments. We'll talk about that in a bit, but preparation might be helpful. So then what? So then we collect all the materials. So these are the big picture is just the easel. There are no other, and your record form, okay? But for the tactile version, there's a few more things. So what would you need? You'd need the record form for scoring, which we will talk about soon. The appropriate binders. There are 3 binders of items. And the manipulative items, which include, as you can see, bowls, blocks, and a small foam car. We recommend that you take out each page to present it to a child and present them individually on some kind of non-slip surface. So you see in the image here, there's a like shelf liner, so non-stick shelf liner. And I believe some of this comes with the kit, but it's also readily available at the dollar store as shelf liner. So it's not anything more fancy than that. It does prevent distraction on the part of the child with the assessment. So if you give them a page and they can kind of swish it around and make different noises, often they will want to do that, and the non-slip surface kind of keeps that from happening. So let's talk about some other tips for setting the scene. So you want to be prepared when you're ready to give the assessment, right? So I want you to think about your teacher viewpoint, right? You can sit across from the child like you saw in the image I showed you before for the big picture or the tactile, right? However, I recommend that you might want to have either another adult sitting behind the child or have access to a mirror so that you can see what the child chooses. So if you're sitting and the child's on the other side of the easel, you are not necessarily going to have a great view of which one they're choosing unless you have a mirror or the other adults can tell you. Or you could think about a setup that we have in this image here. So this is you need to make sure that you can see the child's hands clearly when they're making their choice, right? The image here shows a TSVI who has a visual impairment herself, and the way she set up the child with the big picture version, she has the child next to her who has the easel, and he can see the images, and then she has a version with her low vision device to be able to look at the script. So this way she doesn't have to be looking very closely at her script and then looking over to seeing what the child has. She can kind of keep an eye on what's going on. And this is super effective for her. So as long as you can see what the child is going to choose, that's your prime viewpoint, right? Now, the children should be comfortable. This is hard work. This is hard cognitive load. So I let children sit in my lap. I let them stand. We've had a little girl stand at a giant gathering drum. So it was up high, close to her face, and she would do an item, and then she would play the drum, and then she would do another item, and she would play the drum. Doesn't matter to me as long as she can give me the answers that I need. So then also, it's very appropriate to give preschooler movement breaks. Like I said, this is a hard task. And it's a great way for you to sometimes get an idea of, do they know their concepts on their body? So, you can say, let's march like an elephant, or let's be a giraffe. Can you put your hands up or down and, do all those fun things and just get their wiggles out before you go back to start with the assessment. And worst case scenario, you should be the ones who can tell if a child needs to try another day. So fatigue is an issue here, and you need to be very aware of that. And children will let you know. If you work with young children, they'll let you know when they're done. And it's okay to say, I think we're done for now. We'll try again some more. There is no time limit, and you can take as many days as you need to give the assessment. You are the one who needs to feel confident and sure about the child's response. They may be able to do all kinds of different responses, and they might surprise you. So most importantly is to have fun. So I always say to children, are you ready to play a game with me? I never approach them as, let's take a test. It's important to connect with them. You're going to be spending some time, and you really want to get to know the things that they know. So remind children that items may have a special meaning for them. So like I mentioned earlier, there is a string of beads is one of the items. And I actually had a little girl who had beads in her hair. Her hair was all done up and had many, many strings of beads. And we spent a good 5 minutes talking about how her beads in her hair felt very much like the beads in the assessment. And every time we came to an item that had beads in it, she was very engaged and would say, I have beads in my hair. We would talk about it. And I'm like, you do, you absolutely do. And why is this important? So research shows that emotional experiences, so being excited and engaged about something that you're doing, facilitates memory. So because she was engaged, she was able to think more clearly about, oh, I know what this is. These are the beads. Look, here are the beads again. So she was able to recognize the stimuli and then could focus on the question. It really makes a difference with preschoolers. So while administering the test, you should present the items using the given script. So both assessments have a script. So we tell you what to say. And it's hard, but really try not to give the children hints. It's difficult to not say, "Are you sure?" So you'll say the script and then they'll give you a choice and it's not right. And you'll want to go, "Are you sure?" And we really don't want you to do that because that's giving the child a hint that it wasn't right. So the better thing to do would be to repeat the question. It's absolutely okay to repeat what's in the script, but it takes practice. And you'll find in the beginning that you'll say, "Are you sure?" Everybody does, and that's okay. But the script is there to help you. The script is also available in Spanish. So it is the great people at APH who are able to give us that as well. So it is an option for you too. It will take time to learn the script. And if you keep to it, it will be easier, but you don't have to memorize it. It's right there in front of you. There is no time limit, but again, monitor the children for fatigue. On some items, you are given instructions to guide the children's hands due to the orientation of the item. So there might be something up above and then a line below that they're supposed to choose from. And we want to make sure that they have identified everything on the page before we ask that question. So we recommend that when the script indicates that you can do a hand under hand strategy.
Kathy, I wonder if we could just interject for a moment. This is an opportunity. So in thinking about some of the testing items, would you be able just to kind of share an example of maybe what a testing item might look like, or set it up for us in our mind, and maybe what is the question that the child is being asked? Could you walk us through that, just a scenario?
I can. How about so this is one of the test items. Okay, there's 4 zippers. One of them has the zipper all the way at the top. One of them has it pretty close to the top. One of it has it all the way at the bottom. And one is kind of in the middle. And I believe the question for this page is, can you show me which zipper is up? So we would love, we tried to do the zippers feel very realistic. And so we would hope that the child would choose the one on well, you're going to ask me directions, aren't you? The lower left. They would choose the lower left because that is the one that has the zipper up. And so how would you prepare a child for this if they didn't know that? You can even, I always, preschoolers were always talking about pull your zipper up on your coat. So it's right there on their chest, right? And you can give them experiences of talking about, I see your zipper's up. Can you pull your zipper down? Well, look, your zipper's only halfway. So talking about that in their daily routine is going to help them have a sense of, this is what it feels like when my zipper is up. And then for the getting ready binder item where there'd only be one zipper, then you could have them they can take the page and put it on their chest. And I would even say during the assessment itself, they could take the page and put it on their chest. If that helps them orient to know which one is up, then so be it. We just want to know if they know what it feels like to be up.
And here's another question just to keep us on our toes. You're perfect person to ask. So if you back up just a few other slides, what about the gingerbread slide? We had one that had the gingerbread. They look like gingerbread cookies arranged in 2 columns. So we have 2 rows, 2 columns. Talk us through that one as a scenario.
Yeah, and so this would be one of those slides where it would say to let the child explore, and you can show them hand under hand if they're having trouble with that. So you can be like, here's a gingerbread man, here's a gingerbread man, here, or a cookie, here's a gingerbread cookie, here's a gingerbread cookie, right? So then the question is, which gingerbread cookie is missing an arm? I think that's it, right? I can't see the ones because I have my, yep, it's missing an arm.
Great. That helps to fill in the gaps, and it just fits in so perfectly because the slides were already here, and it's to give the audience an idea of maybe what that idea of that listening to directions
Yes.
and finding out, just picking out that relational concept. So thank you for walking us through those two scenarios.
Of course, and also in the record form, in the score sheet, it will have a line drawing. So it would have a line drawing of this slide with the 4 gingerbread cookies, and it will be circled with the correct answer. And then you just see if the child chooses that or not. So you see that, I think in the next couple of slides, you'll be able to see something like that. Okay.
Thank you.
Uh-huh. All right, yeah, look at that, filling out the record form. And I'm sure you're all thinking, oh my God, how boring. I know how to fill out a record form. But I will tell you that feedback from teachers indicates that this is the most difficult part of the assessment. It shouldn't be, so we're gonna go through it today. There is a test and administration manual that comes with the assessment, and also you can find additional information on the Pearson website. So I believe if you go to the APH Boehm-3 catalog page, there's a link to the Pearson website there, so you can find out even more information. But there is, so while I'm going through this, here's my recommendation. I'm sure some of you will be writing down notes furiously, but I actually think it might be more helpful if you just listen and look, and then you can find this information in the test and administration manual. So I don't want you to miss out on trying to figure out what's going on because you're so focused on taking notes. All right. So to prepare for administering the tactile addition, you will need to fill out the individual record form. So not for the big picture one, you just do the whole thing. But you will need to do it for the tactile and determine the child's chronological age. The chronological age is computed by subtracting the child's date of birth from the testing date. Once the chronological age is determined, we know where to start. So honestly, this is the hardest part of the whole, giving the whole test. All children will attempt there's 5 practice pages before you give the assessment. So those 5 practice pages, just give the child like a little warm up so you can see, can they follow the directions? Can they identify those tactile items? However, if they cannot complete any of the practice pages, then what? So we're all set, ready to go to give the child the test, and they can't do any of the practice pages. What would be the best thing to do? I would say you go back to the getting ready binder and you start introducing those items again so that you're confident that they are going to know them. And then you try the practice pages again. We will discuss what happens when that happens in a little bit. All right, so the Boehm-3 Preschool Tactile Edition binders are divided by age in this way. So if the child is from 3 years to 3 years, 11 months, you begin at item 1 and you stop at item 52, which is the end of the second binder. So if a child is 3, under 4, they do binder 1 and binder 2. All right. For ages 4 to 5 years, 11 months, you begin at item 25 in binder 2 and then stop at the end of binder 3. So you would have the last 2 binders. That's why you need to know what the chronological age is, right? The record form will indicate these separations very clearly. You'll see that in like 2 slides. And then there's rules. So Dr. Boehm has rules for determining that chronological age. So when you need to borrow days, you always borrow 30 regardless of the month. So even if you're talking about February, you're still borrowing 30 days. When you need to borrow months, you always borrow 12, okay? And when you're finished, do not round the days up or down. So there's no rounding. It is what it is. So if the test is given in more than one session, when you're figuring this out, you always use the date of the initial testing. And these rules, again, are noted in the administration guide. So it's not, we're not hiding this from you. So this image shows an example. This child was tested on February 5th, 2016 and February 8th, 2016. She was born on March 8th, 2012. So the first thing you do is you fill in that birth date under 2012 under the year, 3 for March under the month, and 8 under the day, right? Next, we will choose the initial testing date and fill in 2016 for the year, 2 for the month, and 5 for under the day. Obviously, we're going to need to borrow, right? That's the hard part. So remembering our rules, we change the 5 under the date of test to 35 because we always borrow 30, right? Next, we need to change the month to 13 as we always borrow 12 months, and we had taken one away to get the 35, right? So that's what those slashes indicate. And then finally, we borrow a year from the years column, resulting in 2015. So subtracting that date of birth from the date of the test gives us 3 years, 10 months, and 27 days. We are not going to round. So that child is going to start at binder 1 and go through binder 2 because they are under 4 years of age. So I hope this is the hardest part. So as you do it, you'll get better at it. It's not impossible to learn. It just takes practice. Okay, so now let's talk about scoring. So remember how I was talking earlier about how the item is in a line drawing here. So here's that example, and you can see on the right side of the page that those four gingerbread cookies are there with the one with the missing arm, and it gives you the script of what to say. So you'll know what the answer is. You won't have to look it up. It'll be pretty obvious, I think. And now you're ready to begin testing. So your record form's prepared, your items are collected and arranged, and you have confirmed that the child can recognize all the items on the practice pages. So you've done those practice pages, right? First, let's talk about performance item. If you look at this image on the bottom, it says performance item. When we were doing the adaptations, there were just some images of concepts that would not transfer to a tactile image. Concepts like up, behind, empty. So the zipper worked, but then what do you do for something else, right? Behind, empty, it's really hard to indicate that in a tactile drawing because there's depth there. And it kept us up late many nights. So eventually we decided that these items required some kind of performance, right? And that's why you have the manipulatives too. So the cars, blocks, and bowls are going to help you. In this particular one on this page, it's the first one for looking it up, and they actually want the child to do it on their body. So I want you to stand and get ready to do something. Okay, I want you to use your finger and point up. So that's up, the first up, and then the zippers are the second up version of up. So so that's what it'll say performance item, and in the test, it will have itself, there'll be a page when you get to that page, and it just says performance item. And they may have to use the bowls, or they may have to use the blocks, or they may have to use the cars. So it'll be clear. All right. In order to score individual items, I always place a 1 in the box if the child's correct and a 0 if they're not correct. All our answers are correct or not correct. There's no partial responses. You can use a plus or a minus if that's easier for you. But I will tell you that sometimes if you're doing this quickly, if a child's zipping through, sometimes those pluses don't get they don't show up well enough, and sometimes you go back and you go, was that a plus or a minus? I can't tell. So I always use a 1 and a 0 because they're very different, and I can tell. So if you want more information, if you're working hard at this and you want more information, you can indicate NR for no responses when the child does not give any. Or you could use an E that will tell you the child will, that they just pointed to everything. So a child is allowed to change their answer, but please indicate this on the record form so that you can go back. So think about that E. What that E, if a child is touching if you ask the question, the child touches everyone, to me, that's a big red flag that they're starting to fatigue. That maybe we're not going to get this. So you can ask the question again and see if they will give you the correct answer, or something that is where they just pick one. But if they're not, then I would say it's time to stop, and we'll see what happens, and we'll try again another day. There is no ceiling for this assessment. In fact, I would like to remind you that 0 is a score. So if you have those children who cannot even get through the practice items, then that's a 0. And that's okay. That means they're not ready to take the assessment. It's also information. So then you go back to your getting ready binder. You talk about these kinds of concepts more consistently, and I'll share a little story with you later about this. And then you try again. And so if you started with a score of 0, and then in 6 months from now, if you get a child who can do 20, that's progress, right? So it's okay to have them start with 0. I think that's something we don't think about. Well, they can't do it. Well, maybe they can't, but you have to try. You have to give them the opportunity. So, all right. So then scoring part number 2, some other things you need to know. Each concept has 2 items. And there is some developmental progression, but a child may pass one concept item and not both, okay? When the child's done, you count up the correct item in each binder. So you can see in the item here, there's items 1 to 24. They got a score of 20. Items 25 to 52, they got a 22. So the total score, of course, is 42. If you want to do a percentage of that, because sometimes people prefer to report a percentage, you can do, that's 81% of the items, right? And then there's also the option of concept score, which would be half of those, right? So they would have gotten half of the there's 2 items for each concept, so it would be half. And I don't think very many people use that, but it is possible, right? So now what? So now at the end of the record form, there is a child test performance summary. And it will tell you which concept pairs are mastered and which ones are need further instruction. So now we're starting to talk about how are we going to take this information of what they did on the test and transfer it to our instruction. So what are we going to do? So all the items are listed and they tell you, so items 1 and 13, test top, items 9 and 21, test up, items 25 and 39, test nearest. And then those top, down, under, highest, next, up, outside, nearest, across, in front, and around are kind of space. So they indicate those where items, and then we have quantity items also, and that's a different category. And so you can start to see if there are patterns. And what I do is for every concept that they got correct, I highlight that correct answer. And then I circle missed answers. Some people circle the ones that they got right. It doesn't matter, whatever's more comfortable for you. And then the parent report has a similar chart, so you can share this information with parents, which is great, okay? These are the items where basic concepts can be addressed in the curriculum or IEP goals. So the ones that they don't get right, you can go right to their IEP goals. You're back, Amy. Are there questions?
Just expand a little bit about what you mean by concept pairs. When you come to the slide, that's something that you mentioned, and I think I understand. I just want to make sure.
So every concept has 2 items in the assessment. So there is, and they're not necessarily so one of them will be more difficult, will be higher developmentally than the other, but they're not necessarily in the test in that order. So the Boehm-3 tactile is developmental. So that means that children who are 4 years, 11 months should do better, have a higher score than children who are 3, right? It depends on the child, right? But in the validation study that I did, it did indicate that most of the children who were older did better than the children who were younger. So I can say that the test is developmental, but we didn't mix them up. So you'll never have an instance where the item for empty is going to be right next to it. So you can see, so item 3 in the assessment is empty, and then item 15 is empty. So they're far enough apart where the children aren't like, oh, I just did this, I know what empty. You know, it kind of, it's a struggle. They have to think about it a little bit. Oh, we're back to empty, or we're back to smallest. Does that help? Is that what you needed?
That is great. Thank you for helping to expand on that.
Okay. Yeah. All right. So sharing results. Let's share results with others. We need to share it with teachers, therapists, and the IEP team. The good news is that for the first time in 52 years, our field has a valid tactile assessment. And I can say that it's true because I did the validation. The adaptations we made were used in my dissertation, and the numbers indicate that Boehm-3 Preschool is a stable instrument with scores that can be reported with confidence. So it is a valid assessment. So if you're going to your IEP team and they're like, well, we need you to do a valid test, we can no longer say there are none. There is. And I think there have been some other in the past couple of years, but this one I can say with confidence, it is valid. It is the perfect test to use when you're collecting evidence for a learning media assessment. Over the years of administrating and watching others administer this test, I've been surprised that some children who you would think can succeed with the big picture version actually are more efficient with the tactile version. My recommendation is that if you're unsure, you can do both. So it's a great evidence collecting tool for that learning media assessment. It is a progress monitoring assessment, and it can show progress over the course of the year, and that kids have made progress on an IEP goal. So if you gave the BAME at the beginning of the year and a child was struggling with, let's say they were struggling with empty, okay? And then you could write an IEP goal that says, we're gonna work on the concepts of empty and full. And then you do it again at the end. It can guide your instruction so you can really focus on some of those concepts that they don't have. And then at the end of the school year, if you give it again, maybe they've got it. And then you can say, look, they made progress. I would have given my right arm to be able to do that when I was a TBI. There just wasn't anything for me to do that with. In addition, there are options for reporting results. You do not have to give a score. You can share the performance range that we'll talk about next here. Okay, so in the kit for both tests, there is a parent letter, and it talks about a performance range. There's some other things too. The results are important to share with the early childhood team, yes, and IDEA supports opportunities to include parents in the educational process, right? So the parent letter report form is a separate document that can be shared in a conference and sent home with the family. I do not support just sending it home with no explanation. So I really think it's something that you need to meet with a parent or have a phone call and you're both looking at, or I guess you could even do a Zoom, right? And look at it together so that they understand what you're talking about. There is a performance summary. So that was this, right? So there is a version of the performance summary in there. So you can talk about very specific skills and concepts that the child may have missed. You can circle the concepts that the child's missed and give and then you can give the range. So here's the option to giving a score, right? Here's the levels. So level 1 says that a child knows most of the concepts of other children their age. Okay, so that's a performance range of 1. And then number 2 indicates that the child knows many of the concepts that are age expected, but is still missing some. And so this is tricky. There's no guidelines for what does that mean. I usually use, do they have like 45% to 65%? If there's somewhere in there, then I would say that's a 2. But you can make that call. The truth is it's somewhere in the middle, right? They have some of them, but they still got some work to do. A 3 performance range indicates that the child has a very low understanding compared to their peers, and that we need help. So we need help with the therapists or the teachers and parents to really kind of work with their child to kind of bring their concept understanding up to speed. So also included in the parent letter are some simple routines-based activities that parents can try at home with their child to improve concept understanding. So things like when you're out for a walk and you're walking across a bridge, you can talk about the word across, or going across the river or across the bridge. So just little examples for parents so that they can start bumping up the concept development conversation with their child. Okay. And finally, we're at lessons learned. I hope that I am okay on time. I have no idea, but am I, Amy?
You are doing great. And
Okay.
what I want to ask you is one question with lessons learned.
Yes.
This might be a segue into things, and it might be a different trajectory. But if you will repeat about the age range for this
Oh, yeah.
assessment, and then touch upon your expertise opinion about using this for students that have cognitive delays that chronologically are a lot older. What would you share?
Yes. So the age range for the validation is age 3 to almost 6. So 5 years, 11 months. And this is one of our lessons learned. So I am going to share that in depth with you about, can you use for older children? And I would say absolutely yes. But there's some things that you need to do. So I will share that with you as we go further here. But yeah, so it may have even been more, but I have administered over 300 Boehm-3 preschool tactile and big picture tests. So I hope this section will answer some of your questions, like that one, because the truth is, when you do research, there's always more questions than answers. I don't have all the answers, but I can tell you what happened during the validation and what kinds of things we can share. All right, so that's not what I want. There we go. So let's do a little bit of history. I'll get to your questions, I promise. Let's do a little bit of history first, right? So how did we get here? If any of you are as old as I am, you may have run across a much older version of the Boehm test of basic concepts that was created by APH and Dr. Hilda Caton in 1983, and it may be hidden in your storage closet. That is not the same thing. It's different. So let me tell you what. This test only use different shapes, such as circles, squares, and triangles. And think about those for preschoolers or even for older children. Those are a little abstract. So by the time you understand the difference tactily between a circle, a square, and a triangle, you probably have a pretty good understanding, or you may be older, of the concepts. So is this is more in depth, and we think more age appropriate for children who are in preschool. Okay. Meanwhile, okay, so we had that test. Meanwhile, Dr. Boehm had created a preschool version of her original test in the early 1990s, and APH made the decision to adapt that first. Dr. Farrell, who was my advisor on my dissertation, and I felt it was important to adapt the new items based on real life objects as much as possible, so that preschoolers would not be focused on the tactile discrimination issue, but would be focused on the relationships. Okay, so that prototype development included a field test, and it continued from 2009 to 2012. So when I tell you there's a million details, there are a million details. And we made many changes, and we feel pretty comfortable about the final product. The final version was released in summer of 2014. So that would be the one that you can access now. And then my validation took another 3 years because I went around the country, thanks to Dr. Boehm's funding, I assessed 120 preschoolers to get that validation of the tactile version. And just a side note, that's not what this is about, but there is also a kindergarten through 2nd grade adaptation through APH that you can access on federal quota funds as well. So you should know that, which is a continuation. So, okay. All right. So before we get to the children with additional differences, let's talk about the 3-year-olds. Okay. Here are some of the things I learned about 3-year-olds. The Boehm-3 Preschool is developmental. I've already talked about that a little bit. This means that most children who are older should have a higher score than those who are younger. 3-year-olds may not be able to take the assessment. Remember, zero is a score. It's okay to get a 0. That tells me as a TSVI that I got a lot of work to do. Let's figure out what we have to do here. My first official assessment for the validation was an example of this. And I want to tell you this story. So this little boy, I was very excited. This was a little boy that I had in early intervention. So it had been a couple of years. And since I had seen him, and I called his mom and said, can I come and do the Boehm tactile? We're all excited. So got there and he could not do any of it. So very disappointing to him, to me, to his current preschool TSVI. And in talking to his mom, we kind of, I was letting him kind of interact with the performance items, the car and the blocks, which you see a hand here, his hand here. This is how he was holding the block in the car. And the performance items for the block in the car, an example would be, we would say, put the block in front of the car. So first of all, they have to be able to orient the car, right? And then they have to put the block in front. So they have to put them down on the table and do it. It wasn't happening. He was not going to put that block down or the car down. It had to be in his hand. So I started talking to mom a little bit more about some other things that were going on. And it became very obvious to me that this little guy did not have object permanence. So when it wasn't in his hand, it just wasn't there anymore. So we talked about some ideas of things that she could do at home. We talked about concept development and I gave her the parent letter and showed her how the ideas. I talked at length with his TSVI in preschool, and they went to work. So the TSVI got out the getting ready binders, started working with him, started putting together centers with stimuli for him, and using the vocabulary of making choices, right? All that good kind of stuff. So here I taught, so they put together some centers or activities. So think about having a button center, right? That button center could have jars of real buttons. You can have the kids do sorting, lining up. And of course, then you have the tactile Boehm-3 image of a button, right? So he's starting to understand that this 2D image, this tactile image is a button, not just the real objects. So we retested him in 6 months instead of at the end of the school year, and he passed with flying colors. So he had at least had a performance range of 2. I don't remember what exactly the score was, but he went from a 0 to a performance range of 2. Now, was that developmental? Was it because he was a little bit older than 3? Was it because his mom and his TSVI had been working so hard with him? And I would say the answer is all of the above. I'm sure that's what it is. But giving him, this is what I'm talking about. So giving him that Boehm-3 tactile assessment alerted all of us that he did not have these skills, that he was not able to use objects comfortably with object permanence, that he was not able to make a choice and follow directions when asked. And in 6 months, he was. So does it matter why he got a higher score? No. What matters is that he did, and that now he has those skills and he didn't have them before. So that's what I have to say about 3-year-olds is don't give up if you try to give it to a 3-year-old and they can't do it. It's okay. It's totally okay. They may not be able to do it. So what do? You go back and you try all these other things. And I also will tell you, this is a parent who really wanted to know what to do to help her child. And I'm sure that her intervention helped immensely. That's a good thing because parents want to know. Parents want to know exactly, tell me what to do. And so we did. And it was successful. All right. So now here we go. Here's your question. So children with additional differences. I am often asked, can I use the Boehm preschool with older children with additional differences? And the answer is absolutely, right? Here's what you have to do. If you use it and you are successful in getting scores and you are able to show progress, what you need to say in your report is that the child is older and that the results provide valuable information about what they know, regardless of whether it matches the validation criteria. So for that older child, it may not meet the validation criteria of my study, and that's okay. That doesn't mean the information isn't valuable. You just need to indicate that in your report, okay? That's what you need to do. So here's some of the things that are helpful, right? Again, can they make a choice? So is this a child who can make a choice? Often positioning is everything. So you need to have that child position. They may have motor issues. They may have visual issues where you have to have the stimuli in a certain place so that they can access it. Obviously, you're going to monitor it for fatigue. And they, just like every other child in preschool, is going to benefit from exposure to stimuli, right? So going through that getting ready book, giving them the practice pages, looking at all that stuff ahead of time and having them be sure that they know either what the tactile or the visual stimuli is going to help them. Again, this may be a way to help you determine sensory preferences. And again, I would encourage you to try. Don't assume that a child cannot do this. And here's some stories that I can tell you about why that's important. So several times during the validation, I was invited to test the students at one of the special service preschools in the country. The teacher who'd scheduled all the children, we'd gone through all the older children, asked me if I would like to try to test one little one who had significant vision and motor issues. And I said, sure, let's try. What have we got to lose? So I consulted with the TSVI on positioning and what would result unreliable responses. So it's really important for you to know that what is a reliable response for this child. That's where that choice making comes in, right? She was able to complete 10 items before fatiguing. We gave her significant wait time. So those 10 items took about 30 minutes. But we all felt really confident in her answers. And when I looked over at the end, when it was clear she was done, both of her instructors were crying. And I was just overwhelmed. I'm like, they both shared that when she was gone, that they had never thought she would be able to do this. So again, always try. There is no time limit. There is no, you must get this many done in a day. Do what the child can do, and you need to know the child well. So here's another story. Last year, I tested a young man with CBI whose teacher was very apprehensive about him doing. She's like, he's not going to be able to do it. He's not going to be able to do it. And on his performance on the big picture version, he also had significant motor issues, and positioning was a challenge for him to have voluntary movement with his hands or his head. After a while, I tried the big picture version, and it was not going very well because of the difficulty of his head movement. And I asked, are you okay if we try the tactile version? We gave him, again, a lot of time to use his hands to feel the pages. And I want to say in about 10 minutes, he began to demonstrate a very intentional choice-making movement to show us answers. And I really wish that I had a video because it was spectacular. He had a full forearm sweep of the tactile item, and then use the side of his hand to choose. And it was clear he was making a choice. He did 5 items and then he was exhausted. And I'm like, I can't believe it. This was amazing. And they couldn't believe it either. So again, it doesn't have to be done in a day, and try, because children will surprise you. So then one other thing that I want to tell you about this. So finally, during the validation, I had several experiences with children who were diagnosed with autism and VI. So I don't have research on this. This is just what I saw in my validation, and it's not enough. So if anybody's looking for a dissertation subject, this would be a good one. Every one of those children who had a diagnosis of autism responded very differently to any of the other children who I used the Boehm with. So I would read the script and have everything set out. And instead of answering the questions, the child would begin to count the items on the page or tell me some other characteristic of the stimuli, like they're all white, or something that was not the answer to the question. For instance, they would count every bead on the page or tell me that the item had this color, but they could not answer what was requested. So I really thought hard about this, and obviously it needs to be looked at with many more children than I saw. But have we taught them to interact with academic kinds of things this way? So are they interacting this way because when we give them a page, they always have to count it, or they always have to do the color? I don't know. But it was very obvious to me that those kinds of response, so when a child doesn't know how to make a choice, it's pretty obvious. You give them a choice and they kind of look at you like, or they stare off into space, and you go, they don't know what to do. So, you give them time, you give them opportunity. And if they still can't do it, then they're not, clearly they don't know how to make a choice. This was not that. This was, I can only interact with this page this way, even though that's not what you asked me. So that was something that was unique to that population. And I don't know if that would happen if I gave it to other children with that, but it's something that I think it's important for us to think about and maybe follow up on. Okay. All right, so we're back. We've already talked a little bit about learning media decisions and how this can be a really good tool to help you do that. But I want to give you a little bit more specifics about that. So I think those last 3 examples that I just gave you can help you. You can see how the Boehm can help you make a learning media decision. So that little boy with CVI, we tried the big picture version, and that just was not working for him. So we tried the tactile, and who knew he could do it so well. So that would be a learning media evidence-based data to supply, right? The tests are not the same. So the big picture version and the tactile version are not, they're not in the same order. They don't have the same script. So you're not going to have memorization issues. It's not like, oh, well, I gave him the big picture. Now if I give him the tactile, he's just going to remember. Nope, they're not the same. That's not going to happen. Having a score, even if you do not want to share that score, provides actual evidence for learning media. You can time the child when they're interacting with the test to gather more information. So you can time them, how long did it take you to do it with, the big picture? How long did it take them to do it with? And you'll be surprised. So I had many children that I thought were clearly going to use the big picture, and they fatigued so quickly that the tactile was actually more efficient for them. So pay attention to fatigue. Research is starting to show that fatigue is a child's brain telling them that it's time to stop, that they're done, that they shouldn't do this anymore. That's what fatigue is. So we need to listen to them. And if it's too challenging to do, if it's too fatiguing visually, then try the tactile and see what happens. You can give the test over many, many sessions, okay? You do not have to give it all at one time. All right. So we're coming to the end here. I'd like, as we come to the end, I want you to think about the Boehm-3 Preschool Assessment as something you can use in many ways. And I have an image here. I was lucky enough to go to a conference in Ireland this summer, and this is Cork, Ireland. And I just thought this bridge, there's a picture of a bridge going over one of the rivers, and the wall leading up to the bridge is just covered with centuries old moss, and it was the most incredible tactile experience. So I want you to think about the Boehm, how it can be kind of a bridge to what you know about this child to share as they go to kindergarten, right? It's a tool to give you greater insight into what those children you work with know about basic relational concepts. I teach future teachers of visual impairment, and I can't tell you how many times we talk about how critical it is for children to have the knowledge of these basic concepts. But are we really teaching it intentionally? This is one way to find out. So this is a way to measure what they know, and then to give you the guidance of how to teach it. It is a valid and concrete way to show others that children are making progress over time, even if they only know one extra concept in 6 months or 12 months, or can only complete 2 items on the assessment. That is progress. That is data. You can show that. And I will tell you, parents are so excited to see that information. I know there's a lot of anxiety for teachers about, well, I can't tell them the score, but you know what? Most parents want to know the score. They want to know. So remember when we were talking about the performance summary and how the columns show the different kinds of concepts? So one of them was quantity. Well, one of the little girls that I tested, and then I was sharing the parent letter with the parent, it showed very clearly that she was struggling with quantity. So she was doing okay in all the other concepts, but the empty and full and those quantity those pre-numeracy, early numeracy kinds of concepts were really hard for her. And her mom looked at me and she said, that's really interesting because that's what her IEP team is saying, that she needs to work on those quantity concepts. And I was like, awesome. How can I beat that? That's exactly what I want to hear. So that's just one example, but I think you will find that it can pick out exactly what they know, right? So this test does address a variety of skills needed for kindergarten and beyond. So you are working towards those early learning guidelines. Dr. Boehm created this assessment. So the original test of basic concepts for her, like I said, for her dissertation many, many years ago. I don't even know what that original date was, because her first graders were not meeting grade level expectations or following directions. That's a long time ago. I think we can and we should be doing better. And I think the Boehm can help us. So I think that Amy and her crew are going to put these resources in the chat for you. You can, here's the first one is the web page to order the Boehm-3 Preschool Assessments from APH. Remember, it is available on federal quota, so absolutely talk to your ex officio officer to see if you can access it in your state. So I know some organizations have one already, and it may be just on there on the shelf. Or some bigger school, so I know some big school districts have like one and you have to share, whatever. So but find out what's going on in your state before you think about whether you have to offer it, or talk to your officio officer and say, hey, we need this in our state. And then next, if you want to know more about the validation study, a little light reading, no pressure. This is the link to my dissertation. So if you want to know more about the validation, you're more than welcome to look it up. Okay, so copyright, and here is my contact information. I'm here for questions now. But this is my contact information, and there's an image here of two giant 100-year-old anchors in from my trip to Ireland as well, because I do work at Anchor Center for Blind Children. So I thought that's kind of a fun image. So Amy, questions for me?
We have rounded things up, and even the lingering question about a learning media assessment was addressed and how we could touch upon some of that information. So thank you so much for the giving of your information, and to all of our attendees who are with us here to the end and hear these closing remarks. We are grateful to have you with us. Absolutely.
Yes, I want to say one more thing. I need to say thank you to the American Printing House, to Dr. Kay Farrell and Dr. Ann Boehm for this opportunity to help create this test and validate it and just be part of it. It's a difficult process, but worth every minute. So that's it. That's what I wanted to say.